Hey there, it's Ryan, and welcome back to today's landscape tutorial. Here we're going to work on a vast landscape, really focus on the details, on the realism, and as per usual, if you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh no, that looks a little complicated, don't worry, the traceable is up over on Patreon, so if you'd like help with the drawing process, that will help ensure that you get the perspective, all the line work, all of that just right. And up there you can also now get these videos ad-free. All of the videos moving forward, all of these lessons, you can watch without ads, and you can also watch them a little bit earlier. So if you're interested, check it out up over on Patreon. You can also find my ebooks and bonus lessons, all of that good stuff up there. So check it out if you're interested, but we are going to jump into this, have a lot of fun, and with that, let's get to it. We're going to begin here today by taking our 1-inch flathead brush and we'll dip the bottom third of it into a little bit of water. This is just going to help our paint stay wet for a little bit longer, let the dry times be a bit more favorable. Then we'll grab some titanium white, move that to a clean spot on our palette, hint of our Naples yellow and our burnt sienna to warm it up. Right now we're just rendering nice warm bright pigment for our sky. We don't have a lot of sky showing through in this painting here, but we will have it peeking through the trees, and when we do, we want it to match the hue, the atmosphere of everything else. So again, just a hint of those warmer hues, a lot of titanium white. We'll apply it pretty favorably, and then as we move out from this central point, we'll start looking for openings in our trees, and you can see I've drawn in a couple. We'll start with those, but we'll also just put random little patches throughout. It is acrylics, which means it's innately quite thin, so we'll do a couple of layers, we'll really build it up. And you might lose parts of your drawing, that's okay, you can always go back to the start of the video, just work with the traceable. But here, get a good spread. And we'll also add just a hint of it right through here. With that, we'll let it dry and move on to our next step. Now, once we have the background applied and dried, we're going to start working on the foliage that's in that background. We'll build our way forward, make the layering process a lot easier. So we'll take that pigment that we were actually just working with, we'll interject a bit more of that burnt sienna, a little bit of that Naples yellow. You can see we're getting a bit more of a real hue to this. And then we'll also add just a hint of our green gold. So at this point we have a nice, bright, somewhat earthy hue for distant foliage. We'll also interject a hint of Mars black, and this is just to add bit of gray to it. We don't want it to be too saturated, at least in the beginning. And we're also not going with the first pigment we mix. We keep mixing until we get something we really like, and I really like this right here. So from there, using that same larger flat-headed brush, I'm just going to block in some of our distant trees. And this brush is great for it because we can pick up and move a lot of paint very easily. We can also use that sharp corner to interject some fine details. And we'll do that for the protruding pieces of our leaves and foliage. I'll also start moving up here because we do have some greenery through it. And the majority of this greenery, we will make more green. We're just working on the areas in the background that are really absorbing a lot of light. It's working through this portion of the subject. But we'll let this naturally just dissipate as we move towards the right-hand side because we're moving away from that larger opening of light. Though I am just trying to work this around our openings. Like so. We'll put a little bit over here. Like that. While it's still wet, we're going to expand on our mix. However, this time we're going to double down on our green gold. We're going to start transitioning this into something that's a bit more innately hue-wise what we think of when we think of greenery, forests, all of that. So a little bit more Mars black, a little bit of green gold. We still have our Naples yellow. We still have a little bit of our burnt sienna. Still an abundance of that titanium white. And we'll start just loosely tapping on, blocking in some additional greenery. And you can see through these taps, I'm not applying this with a lot of pressure, and when I do, you get something that's a bit more like a line. We're not looking for that right now. We want something that's a bit more of a pitter-patter. We want it to be loose. And if you are having troubles getting this softer look, this more open and airy application, you can just switch on over to the fan brush and it'll do that quite easily for you. But the reason I'm sticking with this one is because I also want to do some blocking, fill in those larger areas. So where we have openings in the sky, there's a lot of these taps, pitter-patters, but then when there aren't openings, I press more heavily with the brush. We get something that's a bit more dramatic and distinct, like so. If I go over my branches, I'm not too worried about it. We can always go back in. And again, here we have portions of that sky. So I go back to a tap. As we get lower, we're going to do more taps because the less light can get to these areas, so that greenery is going to be a bit more dense. The light doesn't flow through it in the same way. It still does to a point, and you can see I'm leaving a good portion of it there, but we're just being mindful. You can see these larger transitions happening. That said, I think I'll just block out the majority of this. And as we get farther and farther to the right, we are going to change our mixture again. So let me get you a little bit farther back so you have a good sight line of the painting as a whole. And we'll edit for that. So right now, as you can see, it's looking a little abstract. It's kind of sprawling, and I love the motions, I love the movements, but with this, it's time to get a little bit darker. We're moving farther away from this light, moving closer to the foreground. There are more shadows because there are more trees. So we're going to actually double down on that green gold. We're going to double down on our Mars black. We're not going for a truly dark mixture at this point. We want to save those more dark values for the foreground. We want the real heavy saturation and the real contrast in the foreground. But right now, we can find something that is relatively dark, at least in relation to that which we've already applied. And we can start applying this. Again, for the most part, I'm not too worried about my drawing. I'm just going to use this brush to cut along the edges of that which is intuitive, easy to work around. We'll apply more pressure to get that fill in. And then you can see that as I try to blend, it's a little bit chalky. And that's because the pigment has started to dry on the canvas. Ideally, this is wet into wet, but it doesn't have to be. So if you're painting dry, or rather on a dry backdrop, we're just going to make the brush a little bit more damp, dip it in some extra water. We can grab some of that initial pigment, and we can just do a blend of those two by re-instigating a little bit of that wetness in the pigment with the additional water. And even if it is a little bit chalky, even if you can see the tooth of the canvas showing through, it's not really a bad thing here, because that just gives us some texture for the greenery in our future layers, right? Also, you might just want it to look a little bit more painterly. There's nothing wrong with that. Love the medium of acrylic, and I love the idea that we can honor it by showing the fact that it is brush strokes and pigments, canvas, and tooth. So sometimes I'll leave that in intentionally. It's really up to you and what you want to accomplish with your painting. Here I'm moving that darker green into the bottom. little taps, move it upwards. We'll do so over here. Now you might want to wait to do the left-hand side and just finish off the right-hand side while you do have more of those still wet pigments and blends. Might just make it a little bit easier. And as we get farther towards that right, again, we get farther away from the light, we interject more Mars Black into that mix, still using titanium white, still not going super dark, but relatively dark. There we go. Leaving it brighter around the openings, that way it looks like there's a bit of a glow coming through. Yeah, nice and easy. So right now we're just putting in those base layers. Doesn't have to look incredible. Here I'm actually going back now that I've run out of water and pigment, and I'm just adding some texture into the previous applications, giving it a little bit of personality and character. I think that'll be beautiful. Let's head on over to the left-hand side. So now we're heading on over here. We're going in with that same darker mix that we used through this mid-section, if not on the actual right-hand side. I'm going to work my way around the more prominent trees. Again, this brush is great because it has that nice sharp edge, easy to make those cuts. Then we'll transition into a little bit of a tap as we get towards the brighter portions. And you can see there's a dramatic difference between this hue and this hue. So I'm going to go back to some of that brighter pigment. I just left a little bit on the side at the top for us to work with, blend with, play with. I'm going with a little bit of a tap, rotating my brush here and there just to make it a bit more organic and add some variance. There we go. And again, I love the little openings. It's great, free, easy texture and depth. And might even go back over here with a little bit of this again, just interjecting brush strokes and variants. But with that, I think we're in a good place. Make sure that it's nice and thick. If it isn't, go back, do a second, third layer. Often, I think people are hesitant to do so because they're worried about ruining that which they've done, but realistically, every time you do it, probably looks a little bit better because you've had an opportunity to learn through each layer what you like and what you don't like, the techniques, you've had a chance to warm up. You can kind of double down at this point. But with that, I think it's time to let this dry, and then we'll go back in and we'll add some real texture with a different brush. You know what? I was going to go ahead and start adding some texture to these, integrate some shadows, some details, but I really like the movement right now, and I kind of want to double down on the larger progression of the piece. I want those background layers in there. So we're going to work on the distant field of flowers here. We're going to be able to see a little bit of it in between the bottoms of the trees and the hills in the foreground, and then we're going to get to this midground area, this bottom portion. Once we have it blocked in, we'll go back in, we'll add some details. So we're going to start here by going a bit brighter, something actually akin to the mid green values that we have through here, not the brighter ones before the green gold, but we'll grab that green gold, we'll grab a little bit of that Naples yellow, hint of the burnt sienna, though this is predominantly a green gold mix. A lot of titanium white because we need to thicken it up, brighten it, but also a little bit of Mars black because we don't want it to be too saturated. And that's really what we're building on here, this balance of the Mars black and the titanium white, till we get something that's in a real mid-ground of our green. So interject a bit more there. It's a bit too saturated. We add some Mars black, and that's really what this process is. You ask yourself, is it too bright? Is it too dark? Is it too saturated? Is it not saturated enough? You go through those 4 questions until you get something where with all of them you're like, okay, I like this. And with that, we're just going to start working this in. And you know what? I was initially going to work around all of these little drawn in trees. I'm just going to redraw them. That's all right. They gave me an idea of how I wanted the piece to progress. I'm grateful for that. It'll be easier to reintegrate them because we have it in the back of our heads now that we've drawn it. And that's a big thing about working with paints and acrylics. I really like applying it, covering it up, applying it, covering it up. It does just give you that opportunity to really learn the subject, to get better at it, get a deeper understanding of it. So that's what we're doing. Just apply that in there. And then we can go back to something quite a bit darker because we're going to have trees here as well. They're going to be casting shadows on the field itself. So we kind of work in between these layers of bright and darker hues. Now, as we get closer to us, we can get even darker, which means more Mars black in the mixture. We can go slightly darker than that which we have up here. We can do a little test. And that is in fact darker. So we're moving in the right direction. And we'll apply this right underneath. Still using that same larger flat-headed brush because it's allowing us to apply a lot of paint quickly. And because we applied this paint quickly in the way that we did here, we're able to do a little bit of a blend between them. So just very softly with my brush, I'm just lifting, dragging down, lifting, dragging down. This is just a base layer, so we won't really see it later on. Not to any great extent, but through portions that you do see, you'll have this nice texture, this nice gradient. It won't be this hard, awkward marking. And I'm okay to have this texture in there. Just bring that down a little bit. Like so. Head on over to the left-hand side, do the same. We're not doing it in the middle because there's so much light through here that we're not going to have the shadow. It's going to be a bit of a unique spot. And then this area, we have essentially a beautiful cluster of flowers. And they are going to be in the shadows. They're also going to be painted with this as a base layer. So we're doubling down on this pigment. Wide strokes. Might need to grab some extra pigment, but let's see if we can finish this off. Working with an X-shaped pattern that allows us to not only move pigment left and right, but also up and down simultaneously. Makes it all nice and easy. There we go. And we can make it slightly darker on the hard right-hand side because we are farthest away from the light. Do a little bit of a blend. Again, we want a nice thick layer. We also have a lot of shadows right down here. But I think we'll tackle that area in a little bit. Now, as we continue to get down, we're going to move into even darker, deeper shadows caused by the trees in the foreground. So yet again, doubling down on the Mars black. I still have some titanium white. That's going to help thicken it. It's going to allow our green to show through. But here we're going to have our darkest pigments in the painting, and these will also be interjected into other pieces of the painting, but for now it is the darkest value we have. And if we work quickly, we can even get a little bit of a blend of it into that green that's right above it. Make it a nice soft transition, like so. Nice and easy. This area is going to be incredibly bright, so we'll be working with a brand new green for that. And you know what? Let's do that right now. Let's grab a lot of that green gold, that titanium white, a little bit of our Naples yellow, We can keep it warm and earthy with a hint of our burnt sienna. And we're not going to go for the greatest highlight that's going to exist in here. We're going for more of a mid value because we want to build shadows and highlights on top of it. So let's go and test this. You know what? I actually really like it. It's very much akin to what we have in the opening. Creates this beautiful flow, I think, throughout a lot of the painting. So again, we apply that with a lot of pressure. We get it close to that edge, and I'm not blending into the edge at any point. I'm waiting until I have it all the way across, and then I work into that connective tissue once it's there. Because I don't want to work into that darker pigment up here and then have to drag that darker pigment down here. It just wouldn't look right. So we'll just create that somewhat soft transition. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a base layer. We're getting an idea of where everything's going to be. There we go. Then we can interject a little bit of this back into the greens, into the lighter greens. It's just going to build in some texture. We talked about that a lot, but it's important. And we can also double down up here briefly, give that a second layer. Again, it's a very similar pigment, so it's something we can jump around with. Now as we step back, admittedly, it's looking a little messy. It's okay, it's how it's meant to be. It's just a base layer. And I'm actually going to take a little bit of this pigment with a fairly watery brush, and I'm going to apply it on the other side of our shadow. This is going to just make it look a little bit brighter, and I'm going to softly work this up. Let it progressively get darker as we get towards the right-hand side and the top. Make it a little bit brighter right here. So again, progressively darker that way. The idea with this is just you can have an additional little field of flowers with some shadows on them, but not too much. And the water is helping us get a somewhat soft transition through there. You can also, if you want to, go in with a very thin wash just to build up some texture through here. Just covering the canvas with some paint. We'll paint a lot of grass and details and all of that pretty soon, but right now we are going to move over here. Grab some Mars Black, green gold, hint of titanium white. It's that same dark mixture that we used for this. Apply that right through there. Nice and easy. Now we'll go back to that highlight. Probably mix a bit more of it because the darker pigments used will take over pretty easily, pretty dramatically. So we'll just build that transitional space. You can see that I'm making a lot of these brush strokes horizontally, and that's intentional. I'm doing that predominantly because if portions of this show through, I want it to look like little blades of grass in the foreground. I'll do that over here as well. It's just giving us the impression at this point. But we'll also build back up to that brighter green gold mix that we actually used in the center. Just make this look nice and natural. Till we get to that much darker base. And then on the other side, because the light's going this way, We'll have a little bit of this showing through on the other side, so we can use it as a transitionary value and hue yet again. Going back in with the darker pigment because mine started to dry. There we go. Nice and easy. Now over here, we go brighter again. Doesn't have to be that bright because we are going to have some shadows. And you can see that these all range a little bit. They're similar, but they range. So don't worry about getting them perfect. We're just trying to think about where the shadows are going to be from the trees and their foliage above, right? And then yet again, right through there, we have another shadow. Work that in fully. We'll do our little transition through those soft taps. Make sure it's a nice thick layer. Nice and easy. And just like that, we've covered the majority of the canvas with some pigment. Now we're just going to get a little bit closer, build up that highlight, and make it akin to what we had right through here. I just want hints of that to graze the grass, which is closest to it. So here we're working with a lot more Naples yellow. We can have that just working its way through the background a little bit. But I'm going to have this kind of stretch, work its way through these hills. So we have a little transitional stop point. That's essentially the ground going up, going down. On the down, it doesn't have shadow. And then on the top of the next raised area, we have this. And we can just have that slowly transition its way out. Doing it through a series of little taps. I think we can actually make it a bit more saturated. Naples yellow will desaturate it to a point, but as long as we have enough green gold in there, we'll do great. And again, the more we layer, the better this will look. We want all of those subtle under textures showing through. There we go. That's a good base. We just have it stretch. We're looking through this flow of light. Now, as we take a step back, as you can see, I've drawn in a couple of those trees and branches which we lost in the initial sketch. We're going to do a base layer for those as well, and the base layer for these is actually going to be done with the same hues we've already been using. So that's a lot of our Mars Black, a little bit of our green gold, a little bit of our titanium white, and these are going to be pretty dark, not quite as dark as what we have there, at least in the background, but it will progressively get that way as we move towards the foreground. So with this, I'm going in with that same brush, still haven't switched brushes, and you know what, I think we'll make it slightly brighter than that. Still want it dark, but that's perfect. We'll just interject a lot of these little trees, and I'm starting with the ones that I did draw in to get a good base. That's essentially what we used for the traceable. And then once I have all of the ones interjected there and I feel like they're empty open spaces, then I'll start creating additional little trees. And you notice that a lot of them don't actually go up that far. That's because for the most part they are going to get lost in the foliage which they produce, but we can make them higher and then we can kind of cover them up. There isn't really a wrong way to do that. It's really about what you feel comfortable with and how much of the trees you want showing. That's an indicator of how much foliage is on the trees. Kind of an indicator of the time of year. I'm thinking this will be a nice spring painting. So there will be openings, but there won't be too many. It won't be wildly abundant. So we move them up, but not dramatically so, at least in my rendering. So we'll just go ahead and we'll block this nice big tree in here. You can see that this mix is a little thin. You can see the green showing through. As we progress, we are going to make this a bit darker. We'll do that second layer. Make sure it's nice and thick. We'll jump on over to the other side of the painting. Like so. Using that nice sharp edge. I'm not applying a lot of pressure because when we do, we expand our bristles. We get a larger marking. And that's great for filling in the trees, but when we're doing the edges, we want more control. So don't apply a lot of pressure here. And then when you start to run out of paint, go into the middle, apply that pressure, fill it in, nice and easy. It's one of those things where this brush is just so versatile. You know how to use it. And you know what? If you're not familiar with using it in all of these settings, by the end of the lesson you will be. Be nice and easy for the future. Now, the majority of this tree is going to be covered by foliage from this tree, but I am going to double down on this spot, just because I think it frames the painting nicely, having these darker values on that side. There we go. You want these of different heights. You want really all of your trees to have different variations of height. It'll make the piece a lot more interesting as a whole, a lot more realistic. Let's get a bit closer for filling in the big guys though. Alright, so for this, again, an abundance of Mars Black. Maybe we'll start with about an equal mixture of that green gold, a hint of our titanium white, but this is going to be essentially the darkest hue, the darkest value that we've integrated. I'm just going to apply this edge first. It's luring to go in and craft the middle, but we do have an opportunity right now while the brush is damp, while we have fresh paint, to get nice edges. I'm going to grab a little bit of extra water, do this side, and in a lot of cases I like to make these markings, as you can see, in a staggered approach. I'm not, again, for the most part, occasionally I do, but for the most part, I'm not applying it and then doing a straight drag down, because we get a lot more character in the trees by lifting the brush and reapplying it. So we lift, we reapply, we lift, we reapply. Now I'm going in for these smaller branches. You can switch to a smaller flat-headed brush for this if you feel it's difficult to maneuver the larger one. Something I find quite helpful in these scenarios is taking my pinky finger, grounding it on a dry portion of the canvas. That'll eliminate shake from your hand. And then we can just work our way through these branches. And then as we get to the small ones, I'm just going in with little taps. I'm not even dragging the brush, because when I drag the brush, I expand the bristles in a way that we don't really want to. So here, for the most part, it's just taps. And we'll expand our branches pretty dramatically a little bit later on, but often I do recommend starting with much smaller branches because they're just a lot easier to expand than they are to make smaller. So it's better to falter on a smaller branch initially than it is on a larger branch. And we have this one leading all the way out of the tree, renders this beautiful sprawling effect within the painting. And now I think we'll head up to this branch, like so. We can see the sketch, but we also see the open white canvas still showing through, so it's pretty easy to make distinct. Oh, I am going to fill in this area right now because I have a lot of other drawings in the area and I don't want to get confused by them. So we're just finalizing the base layer there. We have another branch which kind of works its way around, weaves in unique ways. This isn't in the reference photo, but I thought it would just be nice for the general flow of the painting. So we took an artistic liberty, and that's also important. I'm teaching you how to do these things, and I'm telling you the steps and the processes. However, painting really is a subjective, beautiful, potentially individualized craft. And if you have an idea and it's different from that which I'm doing, go for it. Have fun, make it your own, and really just work creatively as you'd like to. These are meant to be helpful, they're meant to be a guide, they're meant to inspire you, but they're not meant to stop you from working in a way that you love as well. Right? You can even do a combination of our styles and techniques, and I think it's always a nice thing to see. So here, just continuing, doubling down, start to fill in some of these other portions. And now we can really get the middle of these as well. So from here we take those steps back. We can go in with those nice big bold strokes. We want to make sure that this is all well applied. We want thick layers, especially here in the foreground. But we will have that light working its way along the edge of the tree. We'll incorporate some moss. We'll have some texture wrap its way around when we're done with the base layers. Right now, we're just getting some pigment on the canvas, covering it up so we don't see any of that white showing through anymore. You can see I'm doing a little bit of a tap and drag as I, with a very watery pigment, work this pigment down into the shadow. Just create that natural transition. Grab more of this, work it through here. It's also worth noting, if you want more of a natural flow to your stroke, rather than holding your brush like a pencil, you hold it like this, almost like if you're doing life drawing or something of that nature. It's one of those things where you relinquish detail, but you get to stand a little bit farther back, you get more of a natural flow. And I think in landscape painting that can be great if you find that your applications are getting a little bit too structured, that you're rendering a lot of similar markings subconsciously. It's a good way of kind of breaking out of that. Again, it's more difficult to render intentionally, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Especially in the early portions of the painting where we're just shaping and blocking in, trying to find flow. So that's what I'm doing right now. Just like that, while messy, the canvas is covered and we're in a good place. So now we can start doubling down on adding in some details, building textures, and making it look nice and realistic. Alright, so from here, we'll start interjecting some shadows into a lot of the clusters of foliage, because while light is coming this way, while it will brighten a lot of it, there will be more dense areas of foliage which don't quite get that light. And to render those, we are sticking with a larger flat-headed brush, at least for the mixing process. We're going to go for a darker green, not quite as dark as what we used for these, but something akin to maybe what we have down here in this corner. So titanium white, definitely important. Our green gold, important. Mars black, important. As a whole, it is a darker mixture. I'm blending it pretty thinly on my palette and wide. And I'm doing that because we're going to actually pick up the pigment using our fan brush. As you can see, it has a lot of tiny little markings, and this is great for rendering a lot of details that we couldn't render with another brush. They're so small that even with a liner brush, even with a tapped pointillism-esque application, we're not going to render something this minute and intentional. So with that, we're going to grab that pigment very softly. We don't want a lot of pigment because it will condense the bristles on our fan brush. I'm going to start over here in the right-hand side of the painting. And I'm not going in with the entirety of the fan brush, I'm just tapping with about a third of it. And that's very intentional because we don't want to render lines. We just want a collection of sporadic markings throughout our greenery. So again, I grab that pigment, I go back up to the top, I go back to the side, I work my way towards the left and down. At some point it will dissipate, we'll get something a lot softer. I'm going to avoid the openings for the most part because we're not going to have these dark darts in areas where light does kind of break on through. Break on through. If you ever listen to the Break On Through to the Other Side by the Doors, that's a good song. It's a really good song. Alright. Let's get you a bit closer for this application. Now, it's also worth noting that this brush is completely dry. Typically, I do like to dip my brushes in a little bit of water first, condense those bristles, give us that longer wet life of the paint. However, we're not doing that here because if we did, we would condense the bristles and we wouldn't get all of these little markings. We'd probably get 5 or 6 larger markings, which can be great and will be great in the future of the painting. We'll use that technique for the foliage in the foreground when we want it to be larger. But here in the background, we want it to be much smaller, we want it to be distant, and therefore these tiny markings are ideal. Now as I get towards the bottom, and we have that opening, that light, that's when we apply it with very little pigment, once we've essentially worked the majority of it in the top. And we're doing that because that light is going to work its way through the bottom of the trees to a greater degree. It's because we have less foliage there. We have less foliage on the edges, on the bottoms. So here you can see it's running out, we're going in, we're doing a little bit, it's not too much, it's a bit softer. It's a little bit less opaque even. Now we're entering about the middle area of the canvas. Again, being quite careful of the openings in the sky. But as we get to this spot, we're actually going to change our mix just a little bit. Put down that fan brush, pick up the larger flat. We'll interject a little bit more titanium white, a little bit more of our green gold. And the idea here is that as we get closer to the light, even our shadows are going to be a little bit brighter. Not by a lot, but these marginal differences as a whole throughout the entirety of the painting really add up and build something, again, that can have some real realism to it. I know that we're far away from realism right now, and that's okay. We're still in the blocking stages, but just trust me. You've seen the thumbnail of the video at the beginning of these. I typically do a little preview of what we're working towards, so you know where we get to with this. And we just need to trust that process, trust yourself, trust the pigment, and we'll all render something we're nice and proud of. Creating a bit of a transition area where it has both the darker taps in the center, but also these lighter ones. I'm not afraid of going over my trees. We can always repaint those. There we go. And when we also start to really get towards this left-hand side, when we get to around the light that opens, we are going to switch back to the larger flat Yet again, double down on the titanium white, double down on the sap green. We brighten that up. We keep it somewhat saturated. Switch back over to the fan brush. And that's so much better for this area. We can even start working in some of the trees which are visually notable, have definitive form here. And I'm doing that in the middle of the highlighted areas that we have. This is our first real rendering of shape in our trees. Again, don't worry about covering the base of the trunk or any of that. This is just the implication of foliage from a distance. This pigment can also be great for running the bottoms of this, like we talked about. Just having it be a bit brighter. Have it be a bit more dense towards the bottom. That means more taps, and we're just doing that to have that buildup of shadow in a very subtle, natural way. Then we'll move on over here. And this can utilize the shadowed pigments as well. We're just going to jump back and forth between a couple and build that same texture in a way that makes sense for the amount of light that works its way right here. Probably akin to what we did there, right? Ooh, really starting to like that area too. See, we're getting there. Just need patience, trust, and we make it happen. Now, from here, once it's fully dry to the touch, we have the opportunity to make minor changes via glazing. So if there are some areas that we want to be a little bit darker, a little bit brighter, we can kind of accomplish all of that with a singular application, make it easy, but it is important that everything is dry. That way we're not picking up paint that we really want to be in these areas and at opacities that it's been applied. So with that, we're going to go in with a larger flathead brush. It's a classic. We'll grab some Mars Black, about an equal mixture of green, gold, and you don't have to do this if you're happy with all of your values, but I do want to give this a slight vignette effect, draw the eye inwards. The eye will innately go to the brightest point of any piece, so by making the edges darker, we move the eyes in, and we're going to start by just mixing up a little bit of this darker green. I'm going to apply that, as you can see, on that right hand side. Pretty watery, slightly changing the hue, and I'm just softening my stroke as we get closer to that inward section. Now, I think we'll also do a little bit here, but not too much. And I'm going to try to move my brush in the general direction of the light, if not the general direction of the grass. We can even do a combination of the two. Building up multiple line works and textures can be pretty advantageous later on in the painting process. But the idea is we're just making the edges a little bit darker. And we need a lot of water to do just that. Now we're not going to have a lot of light through this section, but we will have a little bit. And it's also worth noting that we have this background which is pretty bright. I think I'm going to darken that substantially because after taking those steps back, if you really think about it, a lot of this area is going to have shadows from these trees. So while it's farther backwards and it's in a spot which can receive a lot of light just by proximity to the source of light, it itself is probably going to be a bit darker. So let's grab that darker mix And I think we're just going to almost work horizontally initially. Get a lot of that on there. Switch over to more of a vertical stroke, that way it's in the movements of grass to a point. We'll do it on both sides. We'll just essentially interject the shadow into this spot. We'll just keep that nice and dark. Go over it a couple of times. And if you feel like it's not dark enough, you can go in with another mix. However, you can also let this dry fully, and then you can go back in with another glaze. This is an easy way to brighten or darken an area. It's also an easy way to interject an additional hue if you want to make it warmer or cooler. It's really up to you. But I like that this is now darker than what we have here. I think this needs to be the brightest point, and by quite a bit. And we're just working in different ways to accomplish that. I'm also using this glaze, as you can see, to create some subtle grass markings. So there's a lot you can do. It's all about what you want to do with your piece. Now I do think we've built up quite a bit of water, and I don't want to start ripping it off. So I think we're going to let this dry fully, and then we can come back in a little bit later with another layer or more details. So as you can see, we have everything fully dry. We have this vignetting effect with the light in the center. I want to double down, especially on this right hand side. Don't want it to be as saturated though. You can see that the glaze that we did had quite a bit of that green gold in it. We still want that green gold, but I'm going to interject a little bit of titanium white. It's rough when working with glazes because it's inherently such a thick pigment, but it is going to take down that vibrancy. And now we'll just apply a little bit on that edge. We'll work our way to that center. Our pigment is slowly dissipating. You can see that this is a lot brighter than what we had over there, and that's just due to the pigment naturally running out, and that's what we want. And again, there's a lot of reapplications. We'll spread this pigment down towards the bottom into other areas of shadow, and that's going to be beneficial because it's going to make it cohesive with this not so saturated variant of the glaze hue. Also, it's worth noting, we could have painted this a bit darker initially, and it wouldn't have been a wrong move. However, when working with glazes like this, we can kind of open ourselves up to these beautiful transparencies that occur in between the hues in a way that doesn't present itself when working with such opaque initial applications, such thick initial applications. So this is actually a great way of building it up to look a little bit more dreamy, having that luminosity show through. It can look a little bit more painterly. Brush strokes are more present. Things are less exact, but it's not a bad thing. And it's really dependent on what you want and stylistically what you're working towards. But I'm a big fan. I like it. So with that, I'm just going to interject a bit more texture while I have it on my brush. See a lot of brush strokes through here, and I'm a fan of just about all of them. And of course we do the other side just a little bit. So stepping back, we're in a good place. We have this great flow to it. I think that's as dark as it needs to be. And now that we have our base layer down for our grass, our shadows, a lot of our foliage, we want to begin working in different mid values, adding real details which will make it look realistic. And to do that, we want to finalize some of the light that's peeking through the trees. So I'll do a bit of a mix using the Naples yellow, the titanium white, hints of our burnt sienna, same pigments that we used initially to render that nice warmer hue. So for the actual application process, I am going to switch over to a liner brush. Nice small guy here, great for detail work, for very intentional mark making. We'll make sure it's damp, and then we can go in and we can just re-interject extra little spots of light, and we're going to do that predominantly in areas that are a bit brighter. So where we have lighter greens, less shadows. Something what I really like about this is we kind of have this moving, swelling effect. It feels like there's this build and this motion, and we can kind of double down on that idea by adding these further highlights which sprawl out. Again, we're going to get less highlights the farther we get from this opening, because the trees are just going to get more and more dense. But for now, this is a great little way of building. Just a lot of tiny taps. Occasionally we'll expand to make it a bit more unique. And a lot of mine, again, as you can see, are kind of working in this flow state. Building this larger, more rounded composition that's centered around the light. We're also going to have small little openings in the bottoms of some of our trees because, again, the most dense part of the tree is the center. The tops, the sides, the bottom, less so. So we can have extra light, poking through here, but also to a point down here. And this just shows that there's an end to this forested area. It's going to lessen the more we move towards the right-hand side, but there will be occasionally a bit of a larger spot, like you can see with that. I'm probably leaning more into the Naples yellow for these mixes, because I don't want it to be as stark and bright as what we have in the center. We are moving away from that brighter light to a point. There we go. Very good. We can also apply little bits of it throughout. As it runs out, we get this softer highlight, which can also be nice to kind of set us up to add greater highlights later. I like that a lot. Okay, so just like that, we have an abundance of new details. Help us build our composition and realism. And we probably want to interject a bit more of this light towards the bottom, just on the grass as we let it dissipate. I have a very watery mixture here. There's not a lot of paint on my brush. I'm essentially just doing a lighter wash, as we talked about. From there, it's time for the next step. From here, we'll add some mid-values into our trees and start to brighten this up, because we started with a base layer, and that was great. It was kind of on the darker side. Then we added the really dark textural shadows. Now we add the foliage that's on top of those shadows, and again, creating those openings for both light and dark. So this is a lot of a green gold. It's a bit of titanium white. We'll probably start with about an equal mixture, if not a little bit less. We'll go within a fourth of our Mars black. And then we'll just continue building. I think I want this to be a bit brighter, but also a bit more desaturated. So I'm going to double down on the Mars black and titanium white in the mix while keeping it bright. So the more I mix this, the more I change it, the more I want less green gold. Again, we don't go with the first pigment we mix. Here you can see this in relation to our other greens. It's almost the brightest green we have. We don't want that. We still want this to be something that has a bit of shadow to it. And I think we're quite close. Just like that. Now I'm spreading it quite wide on the palette, and we're going to be applying it with the fan brush. However, right now you can see the fan brush has all of these little bristles. It was how we applied the shadows. I'm not going to use this in this way. I'm going to make it damp, and that means, I'll show you, dipping it in a little bit of water, going to wipe off the excess, and what that does is it condenses our bristles. Now we have this fork-like effect. We're making less markings, but they're bigger. And that's great for foliage, which is a little bit closer to us. We want it to be a bit bigger because perspective is going to make it look bigger. With that, now we're going to go in. We're going to grab our greens. I'm going to start fairly close to our light. And you can see it's darker than the highlights. It's brighter than the shadows. It's very much in between, and that's what we were looking for. Also, if you're trying to do this with your fan brush and you're finding it's not working as well as you want, you can use a soft bristled fan brush. They often condense with water to a better degree. Hard bristle ones stay a bit more strict in form. They keep all of those little markings, which can be great, but we want both the hard bristle fan brush effect and the soft bristled fan brush effect. I'm using a brush from my brush line, and it was designed so that we could do both with the same brush. If you're interested, that's available in the video description, but as you can see, we're just going over a lot of these past markings, a lot of these branches. Don't worry about over covering branches because we can always go back in and redo trees. And we're going to do that. We're going to do a lot with that because our trees are still yet to have detail. We don't have textures on them. We don't have gradients. And they are still just that base silhouette that we started with. So we'll build that shortly. Right now, it's worth noting that as we move towards that right-hand side, we are letting our pigments dissipate. We're not grabbing more pigment for the most part, and that's because I want the highlights, these protruding pieces of foliage, to be a bit darker over here. We have more shadow in this area, and that means even the protruding areas which catch light will catch less light. And here we'll just do a couple little taps over our trees, just so it looks like the leaves exist not only behind them but also in front of them because they will wrap around. And then we can grab a bit more water, a bit more pigment. We can head over to the left-hand side of the canvas, and this is quite small, so this will happen in no time. We've also had a good amount of practice. If you wanted, you could actually practice with this side because it is smaller and it's less visually impactful. It doesn't matter as much. You can kind of take those liberties with a bit more of a lackadaisical application and trial run. But I'm quite happy with this. I feel like we were warmed up enough. I feel like it worked out. And already, it's looking a lot more real. Now take a step back, and we're going to brighten up our mixture just a little bit using a combination of Naples yellow and titanium white. Adding the Naples yellow so that we can warm it up. Adding the titanium white so we can brighten it up, but also not add too much saturation. Naples yellow innately doesn't have a lot of saturation, so it's not something we have to worry about to a real extent, but it does keep us safe. Now I'm going back to the fan brush, making sure it's nice and damp, that we have that good forking effect. We'll grab those pigments. We're going to start applying this towards the highlights. Then we can work it out from the openings. And that's really where the majority of these markings are going to be. It's towards that larger opening, but also the openings that we've painted within the larger clusters of foliage. And this is just extra light getting its way through, building up these clusters and patches. We are going to let this dissipate as we move towards the right hand side, and I might not even apply any to that true right hand side. We just let it all run out first. We can do a bit more towards the bottom because we have those slight openings in the bottom, and we can do a little bit over on that side, but just in that spot. Continuing to build up highlights through there. They'll be quite impactful in this area because we don't have a lot of light, despite the fact that this is directly adjacent to that larger opening. This is kind of our opportunity to craft that and create those more grand implications of light. Now, yet again, back to the flathead brush, make sure it's nice and damp, grab some Naples yellow, grab some titanium white, make something even brighter, even warmer. We're moving closer and closer to that initial highlighted hue that we used for the foliage. And we're just building that up from this spot. So, as you can see, we started off with something quite rough. We just had general movements and ideas. And now we're kind of at that place where we can add details that solidify ideas, which reinforce ideas, and which build the painting, the composition, the way that we really want to. So really the primary note here is that there are going to be rough areas of your painting, and that's okay. That's acrylic painting. That's the creative process. Don't get discouraged. Don't quit. Keep at it. You will get there. It's just about layering, building it up, having that confidence in yourself, in the medium. And eventually, you start to get something you really love. But you need that dedication, that commitment. Then we really start getting there. We can also create what will be additional future openings, should we want to, by doubling down on a couple of areas. Like that a lot. That kind of gave us that larger flowing effect. While we're doing this, we can even switch back to the smaller flat-headed brush. Grab a little bit of that Naples yellow, titanium white, like we were doing before when we re-interjected the openings towards the bottom. And we can move some of these in here as well. That's a good addition. So, the more openings we have, the more airy, the more free-flowing. You don't have to do that many. This is a bit more subjective. It's how dense do you want your forest to be? Do you want a lot of openings? Do you want few? There is no right or wrong. It is up to you. And how do I figure out how many I want? Typically, I like to overdo it just a little bit and then I work backwards. That way I've seen it with too much, I've seen it with too little, and I know where the correct answer is, and it's somewhere in between. It means a little bit more work, but it gives you that solidification mentally. You're not always wondering. And I think it just makes those finalizations pretty easy. So, I like that a lot. I think it's just about time to go in with our final little highlight here for our background foliage. Switching back to the fan brush, the application process, applying that on this central spot. Really going to brighten up this bottom area. Again, not worried about covering the trees. We can always go in and repaint them. And sometimes it makes sense that it's in front of them anyway. Again, if you accidentally do too much, that's okay. Then you know it's too much. You can just walk it backwards, cover it up with some darker green paint. There we go. Nice and easy. And there's almost none over here. But there is quite a bit over here. Beautiful. Now at this point, something we probably feel the dramatic need to do is go back in on a lot of these and kind of reaffirm placement of trees, consistent value, because now we have a lot of other pigments kind of working on top of them. And you can do this briefly. I'm doing so with the smaller flat-headed brush because I want something that's a bit more sharp and intentional than the larger one, but I still want to be able to move around a lot of paint. And with this, again, you probably just want to go over a lot of those bases. We can do this, and I am to a point, just to get a better understanding of where everything is going to be later on. However, we're not really working on the trees right now. This isn't our primary goal. We actually want to do a lot more in the ground and the field, because we want to layer that on fairly freely without worrying about disrupting perfectly painted trees. So the trees are going to come in the near future, but for now, we're just putting down a couple of fairly loose, non-definitive applications. I'm also adding in additional little trees here and there, but we don't have to do a lot of this. We don't need to bring them up too high. I will occasionally, and this is where it gets interesting, skip little bits of foliage, and then I'll find myself a bit higher, and then I'll incorporate that. And the idea here is that foliage covers portions of the tree, but not all of it. And this just keeps it a lot more diverse and unique. Again, this isn't our primary goal right now, but it is a fun little way of creating more realism in the painting, right? This one, I think we have a lot of foliage. We have some darker areas, we have some lighter areas. The light's kind of streaming in, looking diffused to a point. So we've re-instigated our trees. We feel good about it. Sometimes we do little layers to feel good about the painting. That doesn't always have to be about working towards the end of the painting. Sometimes we just solidify or do areas to get a better understanding of it, to create a better emotional response with it as a whole, and then, fully cognizant of the fact that we're going to cover it up and we're going to redo it soon. But it just puts us in a good mental place and a good understanding. So we go ahead and we do that, and that's essentially what I'm doing here. So again, you don't have to, but if you want to just clean it up a bit, you can. And now we are going to head down. We have a lot of texture, detail, shadows, and highlights in this top, kind of central to right-hand side. I want to interject a similar level of detail into the bottom. Once we have that applied, we can go back to these trees. We can add the details, we can wrap light around them, we can make them three-dimensional. But that's because we're going to be painting them to a point on top of that which we do. So let's head a little bit down, switch our brush, have some fun. Now, everything we've applied up until this point through the bottom is essentially the mid-value of that which we want. So our brights, we can make brighter. Our darks, we can make darker. And we're going to do exactly that. In the top, we started with that mid-value, and then we went darker through a tap, then we went lighter through a tap. Here, we're going to do so, but we're not going to do so with a tap, we're going to do so with more of a drag. And I'm going to begin kind of in the background here, utilizing our Mars Black, little bit of our green gold into our titanium white. We're mixing up not the darkest dark we've used, because you want to save that more so for here and here. It can be a little bit brighter in the back to a point. So I am still using some titanium white. I'm still using more green gold than I would have otherwise. But we do want it to be darker than the shadows that we have implemented in the distance. We want to spread it quite wide. And we use the fan brush to apply the texture in the top. We're going to use it to apply the texture in the bottom, but again, we're going to do so differently. Now, the fan brush is fairly dry. You can see that the bristles are quite sharp. We have a lot of them. It's not forking in the way that we did for the highlights. And with this, I'm actually going to start over here. And I'm just going to do a lot of these micro tap and drags. So making very little movements. This is all below those added highlights that we've done. And as you can see, I'm moving over my trees. This is why we didn't want to put a lot of time and attention into those trees, because we were just going to apply these extra textures, which you don't really want in the trees, over them anyway. So that meant redoing any texture or detail we did in the trees. We just re-implemented them for the sake of understanding the scene. But here you can see it's distant, it's detail, it's a good start. Now, let's grab our larger flathead brush. Let's mix a bit more of it. Maybe make it a little bit darker, not by a lot, but a little bit. Again, we go for the wider mix, a wider spread. And as we get closer to us, you're going to notice that my markings get larger and larger. So I'm not just dragging a little bit, I'm dragging more. I'm not applying more pressure with my brush, and I never want to do that because I don't want to expand the bristles. I don't want thicker markings, I want longer markings. So we just drag more, like so. Again, getting closer, getting better, but now we're entering this area of what could be light. So for this, we're going to take that same brush, we're going to take a little bit of this, and we're just going to drag it out a little bit into that bright area. We're going to create this transitional spot, and we can do a lot more of it through the edge. As we run out of paint, we can move more here. We want a different value and a different hue for those spots. That said, the edges, much more of that elongated marking and in a darker mix. While we have this still wet on our palette, we might as well double down, add a little bit more Mars Black, a little bit more green gold, spread it. Back to the fan brush. We're going to skip this area for a little bit. We're going to spend our time in the shadow, creating longer markings because we're getting closer to us. The closer we are, the longer the markings are, and they're not always going straight up. Sometimes they have a little bit of a bend to them. That's just going to make it look a bit more natural. I don't want these to be tall, and we're going to have flowers covering the vast majority of them anyway. But these are important bases to build. There we go. We'll drag that out here. Again, we have these transitional areas. Like so. Let's get a little bit farther back just so we can see what we're working with. Taking a step back, I think our texture is off to a strong start. We could double down a little bit more on form, and I think we'll do exactly that. So again, doing more of a mix right through here, making that nice and thick. Hint of titanium white just to desaturate. Put a brush at the top, switch over to the fan. As your fan brush does start to dry, if you're working with the same one I am, make sure that you wet it so the paint doesn't dry on it. try to dry it on a little piece of cloth or paper towel, and then you just work the bristles back and forth like that, and it reopens them up, so you have, again, 50 rather than 4 or 5. And that's a good way to kind of continuously work with it as pigment inevitably dries. That said, we're going to rework these areas towards the edges. We're going to rework these areas towards the back. Smaller tap-in strokes here, longer tap-in strokes here. There we go. And we'll just build this up through these shadows. This isn't our final layer. We will refine it. We will add highlights. But I think it is starting to make sense visually, and I like it. Okay. Now, just wet my brush. You can see it forked. Dried it a little bit, and we do that little shifting through here. Grab more pigment. Now we can find our way on this side. It's also worth noting that I like to make grass typically working top to bottom. However, you can go bottom to top depending upon what you prefer. Again, there really isn't a right or wrong, it's how you like to paint. I think doing that works really well actually for grass. However, typically it means that my hand and the brush are completely in front of the camera. So it's a difficult technique to do while instructing, but it can look good. Here you can see a little example of exactly that. Work our way into the transition. Right now, my brush is pretty watery. Not something you really want through this, but because it is, I have the ability to go in with the low opacity applications, which can be useful as we move into the highlight in this area. So this is an area I only really do with a little bit of water on your brush, because you don't want these applications to be dark like they are here. You want more of a mid value. But you can see just texture wise that it lessens as we work our way up. I'm going to add more water to my brush. I'm going to dry it off. Going to open it up, grab more of that nice dark pigment for a shadow. Here, I'll work my way up in that same way I showed you. I think I'm figuring out how to do it well on camera and not always having my hand in the way. I think that's inevitable with these lessons. It's always going to happen here or there, but we can get better at it. We can make it lesser in some scenarios. And as we get farther into the back, these markings get smaller and smaller until they're just pitter-patters for the most part. This also lets you double down on the shadows under a lot of our trees, which is nice. There we go. Also lets us add extra dark hue values to the corners and edges to facilitate that vignetting. We'll bring it in. And again, I don't have a lot of pigment on here, I have quite a bit of water, so I'm able to move up in these grassy areas that are a bit brighter. Let's go one level darker. So just add more Mars Black to that mix. We don't want it to be a pure Mars Black, but we want to move farther and farther away from the titanium white and the green gold. Go in with a nice clean brush. We'll apply this exclusively to the darkest portions of the shadows. That means the very center. So not the left, not the right. The area that will receive the least amount of light. We'll do that for just about all of these. Just like so. Very good. And now from here, we can change our mix and start working on the brighter areas of grass. And not the highlights within them, but rather the shadows, which will build the highlights on top of. Now, sometimes I do like to move you a little bit more so to the right-hand side, looking on an angle. That's so the hand doesn't get in the way as much, but also you get to see a lot of these markings while they're wet without the reflective tendency of acrylics. So you actually get to see what it looks like. When you're looking more straight on to a canvas, when you're working with very wet, watery paint, you often get a reflection, and that reflection makes the pigment look brighter than it actually is. So if you take a step to the left, take a step to the right, you get a more accurate look at what the pigment you're applying looks like in kind of accordance with the rest of the piece. So moving you over here for a little bit, we're also going to mix up a dark, but not too dark, green for the mid values and the highlights. And I think I'm going to start with something like this. It's not too saturated. We want it to be still somewhat sun bleached, at least aesthetically. We'll switch over to our fan brush, which I'm making nice and wide. Oh, that's perfect. Look at that. Now we're making these little markings that will get smaller and smaller as you move up to the point where they are just a bit of a tap and a drag. The smallest creation, and then the background they are just a tap. So here we actually go back to the same technique that we used in the top, and it creates this beautiful connective tissue. It brings things together in a very natural way. We want that. So yet again, wetting my brush, drying it, fanning the fan brush. We'll go back in. We'll do this a couple of times. If an area gets too dark, that's okay. We're going to add our highlights on top of it. We're just trying to build some proper texture. And we can also bring this down, or rather up, into the shadows as well, in those transition areas. So we're avoiding the center for the most part, but this is a great way of creating that cohesive look. See that? So we have the transitions from the light into the shadow now. You can do that in a lot of different areas. This top area, I think, could use just a little bit more. I'm going to fan this. You can even pick up paint before you fan it, but I think it's easier to fan it and then pick up paint. And I'm never using the full head of the brush, I'm just using about a third of it, typically. Because I don't want full straight lines, I just want a lot of markings. And you can make a lot of markings without using the entirety of the brush anyway. Look at that luminosity. Look how it just breathes light. There we go. And again, in the distance, we don't really do a drag, we just do little taps. Create that good transitional texture. Nice and easy. Okay, so it's now the next day, and as you can see, The canvas itself looks a little bit cooler, as do the greens. We were painting in sunlight, and that sunlight kind of added this additional hue to the room, which I love because then you get to see what a painting looks like on a sunny day, here today a little bit like a cloudy day, and just kind of through all of its different settings, because it will come across differently, and sometimes you might want to paint for one or the other depending upon what you have more often in your area. So with that, we are jumping back into this fully dry, of course, and I'm going to begin by mixing highlights for the top of our grass, particularly in the areas with sun. And these are our previous brightest greens. I still want to work within a hue that is green, but I want it to be a bit more sun-soaked. So as you can see, I'm mixing right next to our sky, and the goal here is to find something in between the greens and those brighter golds. Using a lot of Naples yellow because I want this to be fairly desaturated, but it's also the greatest kin to light that we have, and this is light that's streaming down and our setting is adopting. You see we're getting pretty close. I did still use some Mars Black to desaturate it, but I think I like this a lot. We have two different ways of applying it. We could do so with the fan brush. That's how we'll start, but we can also do so with the liner brush or more intentional mark making. Now I'm going to go in with a dry fan brush, so all of the bristles are nice and sharp. We'll load that on both sides. I'm going to head to the back here, and I'm going to go in with a bit of a tap initially. It's also worth noting that a lot of these applications are going to eventually, inevitably, have flowers over top of them. So I don't have to worry too much. That said, as we start to get closer to us, I'm going to start dragging those bristles downwards. And I'm trying not to create lines, so I'm just using small portions of this fan brush. Sometimes it's only a fifth of it. And the idea here is that we'll create something inconsistent looking. Lots of different blades of grass protruding in different directions and angles. We can even start painting vertically to a point. And I like this a lot, particularly in this section. Trying to keep my hand in a place where it doesn't disrupt your vision. But as we start to get closer to us, a couple of things are going to happen. One, we're going to start running out of pigment. That's okay, we can grab more. Two, we're going to need our strokes to get larger because we're getting closer to the grass, therefore perspective is making it look larger. That's okay, we can do that, it's pretty easy. Three, we're going to start spacing out our markings more so that we have more of that shadow showing through. And we're also just going to let there be more unique blades. So back here we kind of apply it on this horizontal tap, and then slowly we disrupt that through additional minor taps, and then we move to more of a vertical tap, and here we are in a vertical tap, but I'm trying to have additional movements that are a bit more dramatic. I'm also letting the pigment run out because I want this area to be a bit darker, so we have that natural transition. Let's grab this. We started up here, closest to the light. Again, I can just paint the tree over. Not a big deal. We're just going to have little areas, little spots that catch that light. And then we'll have it dissipate as you move farther and farther away. Little hints of it, maybe through little openings in the trees. It'll just feel more natural if we have little pieces here and there with that extra light. We want to do a little bit, just a little bit back through here too. And this as well will quickly dissipate. So that's our first layer with the fan brush. Let's get a little bit closer and start refining it. And now as we get closer, we can switch on over to that liner brush we talked about. We don't want a lot of pigment, so I'm purposefully moving the paint around on the palette until I have just a little bit. And this is where we can add a lot more intentionality with our applications, where we can kind of break up those potential horizontal markings that we did unintentionally render. We can really fill in areas should we want to. We can apply more pressure as we get down and build something that's a little bit larger, including individual blades. And that's really the primary objective with this brush right now. Little individual tops of grass, because you're only really seeing the top with the highlight. As soon as the grass starts to bend and move downwards, we're getting something that gets darker, gets shadow from itself and surrounding grass. So we're really just painting these small little tops. And as they get closer to us, we can move more so down, but we don't want to press hard with the brush. We still want a very small marking. It's one of those things where it's a lot of detail, but it's a lot of subtle detail. It'll be quite noticeable along the shadow, so we're really paying attention there, because it'll look extra beautiful in that setting. And with a lot of this, I'm not just grabbing that paint, I'm grabbing paint, I'm adding water to my brush, I'm going back, taking off paint, I'm grabbing paint, and I'm just trying to get the smallest amount possible. Looking for the slight openings in these shadows where there's a little bit of additional green and brighter green, and then I'm doubling down and adding these very sharp markings. I'm getting something pretty visually dramatic at this point, which I like a lot. That's definitely the intention. A lot of my grass kind of slightly sways this way, so I'm making my brush strokes with this pattern. Doing that to imply there's some little bit of wind and it's carrying tall grass in a similar way. We can have the grass kind of moving in any direction if we want. We can have it moving in opposite directions and just note that there's no wind and it's just kind of falling very naturally, very subtly. But I like the idea that there's a hint of a breeze. I think it builds the painting's atmosphere in a way that I like a lot. So we're just interjecting a little bit of that. And then back here, I'm almost making just dots in the background with this brush. And then as you move into the foreground, it's wider, larger. When you have a very watery mixture, you can kind of move in here on the sides. It'll give you a more grayed application, it'll give you a darker application, but it's more of that application that'll build the realism and the understanding of the piece. So Again, painting with subtlety through a lot of this is really what's going to get you there. This is all far away, so I'm not really doing a lot of a drag. There's just a hint of it. The occasional little dash in the shadow. The breakup of unintentional horizontal markings. The interjection of occasionally a little bit of extra light. We can even create additional patterns and openings in the trees should we want to. There we go. Love the subtlety, love the almost sprinkle of light going on in this setting. Might double down on that a little bit. Something that just feels whimsical about the dotted light in the darker grass. Again, trying pretty hard to keep that hand out of the way for you. There we go. Okay, looking pretty nice so far. Do a bit more. Build it up. Don't like to do too much in any one area at any given time. That way we have time to go back and really make a proper assessment of if we like what we're doing, if we want to make edits or changes, if we want to build it up or have less. It's kind of slow and steady approach. And now for depth's sake, we'll add some titanium white to that mix. Just brighten it up a little bit. Switch on over to a stiff bristled fan brush. Mine is a little bit wet, but I fanned it out so that I can make a lot of markings. I'm going to go to the back. We're going to progressively work this forward, just in the ways that we did before. And we'll have this light dissipate as we get closer and closer to us. We can do a hint of it over here. But the idea is that we're building a gradient. And the gradient isn't simply a technical gradient. It's not a physical gradient. It's not one color transitioning into another through a smooth blend. It's a gradient of texture and value. So it starts off brightest at the back, as it should, where it's closest to the light. There we go. Just have hints of it through here. At this point it's just tops of blades. So I'm doing a little bit of a rotated tap with the brush. That way it just catches, again, the implied area that bends with height. But the majority of it's at the back. One more time. Extra titanium white. We are extremely close to the color that we used in the sky. It just has a hint more green in it. I'm going to take my brush, wash it, dry it off on a little bit of towel, flare the bristles just by kind of moving back and forth until they open up for us. Grab that pigment on both sides, And if you're having a hard time building up the highlight through multiple layers here, just go ahead and let the last layers dry properly. That way you're not kind of ripping up previously applied pigment. And I don't think I'm going to move into the foreground, the true foreground with this. I think this is something that intentionally remains in the background a little bit, just because it's so bright. And we do want it to progressively get darker as you move forward in the painting. There we go. So now from there, we're going to get a little bit closer to the canvas. We're going to rebuild a lot of that highlight that we were just interjecting into the grass, though we're going to add a hint more green to it this time. When we do that, we are going to have to work back into the Mars Black, because you can tell this is just far too saturated in relation to everything else that we have on our palette. So we just use a hint of that Mars Black, and we can jump back and forth between the Naples Yellow, the Titanium White, till we get something bright, somewhat desaturated. And we'll switch on over to our fan brush. However, this time we are going to intentionally make it quite wet and have that forking effect, because I want larger applications. These applications are going to be for our foliage in the foreground. So we're going in with a more pressing tap. We're kind of lining to a point these branches. We're having them get a little bit randomized here and there. We can repaint this branch in, so I'm not worried about going over it. But this is how we bring light to the right hand side and kind of mirror the beautiful highlights that we have in the grass at the bottom as well. So we're also going to go a little bit higher. It'll get lost when we get into the areas that have a lot of light, but this is a more green mix. It's a bit more saturated, not dramatically, but a bit more, and that's going to help us differentiate the openings in the background with these very highlighted leaves and foliage. We can also have a couple over here. And a big distinguishing factor is the fact that they do overlap the branch. That shows that they work three-dimensionally, that they aren't just in the background. It creates this extra element of depth. And we're doing the majority of them with this. We're also going to have a couple of them find their way out into this opening. Try not to do it in just lines, but we are going to have some of those. And then I think we'll switch back to the larger flat. We'll make it a bit brighter. We'll add in a hint more of that sap green. I said sap green, this is a green gold. You can use a sap green. Green gold's just a little bit warmer. Going to switch over to the liner brush. And then in the prominent ones, you can see that we are making a more prominent tap. And we are going to re-interject branches that connect to a lot of these. Not all of them, because sometimes the branch will just be a little bit too small that we can't see the impact, the structure, but that's okay. We will interject enough later that it makes all of these feel like they make sense. And I'm going over the areas that we know we like. That's where we're starting anyway. They really show up over here towards the right hand side, and we like it. It's a good look. Kind of feels flowing in a similar way to the rest of the piece, right? I cannot wait to work in these branches. We can create clusters, as you can see. Some areas are going to be more dense than others. I think this is an area that can be quite dense, just by virtue of being so close to the tree. Head on over here. Great way of adding in leading lines. There we go. Looking good. Do a couple tiny taps out here. Very good. Very, very good. You can interject that into the bottom should we want to. And we just double down with the thickness because acrylics are inherently pretty transparent. I think that looks quite nice. Now, stepping back, I think we're doing pretty well. And at this point, we have a lot of our foliage in there. We can begin working on our extra branches. So we're going for a pigment quite similar to that which we've used in these trees. And we can do a little test. We can even clean up edges with the mixed pigment should we want to. I'm using the larger flathead brush for the mix because again it just has the best potential to move around a lot of paint. And once we have that good mix, we're going to get a bit closer. We'll switch on over to the smaller liner brush, and then from there we can begin re-interjecting a lot of those branches which we lost behind foliage. We can also start connecting little loose pieces of that foliage through incredibly intentional small markings. And with these, we can redefine lost larger branches as well as smaller ones. If we want, we can re-interject foliage on top of these later on. And it's just this opportunity to do a lot of reworking in terms of your composition, your leading lines, connective pieces. And right now it looks like we actually lost the sun behind some clouds, which is also an interesting situation to paint in. We talked about painting on sunny days, on cloudy days. Here we have a day where it's sunny and then it's cloudy. It's sunny and then it's cloudy. And initially, when I was younger and I was painting, this would I find it difficult to paint in because it's one of those things where I felt like I was always bouncing between turning on lights, turning them off, and trying to just work in accordance with that which is going on. But I think later on I realized that it can actually be pretty beneficial because, again, you get to see the painting in lighting scenarios that are natural and realistic to the setting. And when you put a painting up in a room, it's not going to be seen through the same lighting all the time. And this just gives us a better idea of some of those settings, but in a singular day. So I'm going to make the camera a little bit brighter for you. There we go. It's still a bit dark for me, but it's alright. Just a friendly reminder that it's not necessarily a bad thing. When the lighting changes, you can learn a lot in these scenarios. And I think a positive attitude will get you a long way. Now I think we'll also start moving some branches out the other way, kind of on this side, because they will be there, and we'll also have some in the distance in between a lot of this foliage. There we go. I like that. Nice and clean. We're getting smaller markings than we've used before. It's a big benefit to this part of the painting. This is where we can interject a lot of realism and form, which we might have been apprehensive about doing earlier. I'm also trying to get that larger motion, that swirl effect that we started earlier. In these areas, pretty visually dramatic. Now we have a good central spot. The eye really wraps around there. And sometimes when the branches don't look tidy and they don't follow composition, they look a lot more natural. So it's okay to break those rules and occasionally do things that make it look less technically aesthetic for the sake of creating something more organic. It's interesting how that can improve a piece in general. And if you feel like you accidentally paint over too many pieces of that new foliage, it's okay, we can always go back in and re-interject more. It's an easy little tap, right? I'm going to thicken that just a little bit. We have that wraparound. It's still a bit dark in the room, but we'll get that sunny look soon. There we go. Now from here, once we have all that dry, we're going to introduce a little bit of ultramarine blue to the palette, and we're going to use this for the shadows in our trees. The areas that are opposite to where the light is, so it'll be a bit cooler looking, and it'll be mostly a gray, but it'll be a bit of a cool gray. We can also interject a hint of green just to keep it nice and cohesive, but now it's a cool green, and I think this will be pretty lovely, wrapping its way around. So with this, I'm just going to head into that larger body of the tree, and I'm going to paint this in areas where there isn't going to be moss. Anywhere I'm leaving open with the intention to paint moss climbing the tree. And you can be pretty dramatic with these applications if you want. I'm trying to get some sharp edges. I'm also going in with a soft tap for others. That way it looks like there's a bit of a bleed from the bark into the moss, and it's a less harsh transition. We're also going to interject a little bit of it into these trees in the back, and this one as well. I'm going to grab some extra water. Though, while I am working with water here, and while I would recommend playing with it at least a little bit, this is a spot where it isn't really necessary, because that grit and that tooth of the canvas can actually look really nice on bark. Just add in some natural texture. So with that, we'll do a couple of spots up here. Trying to be quite playful with these applications. Building larger structural pieces for sure, but also happily having smaller interjections of the hue as well. So you can see that I'm now tapping with the corner of the brush just to get some unique splatters. But we can also work these back in a little bit later as well. So far so good. Let's work on into the greens. Grab some Mars Black, Sap Green. We're starting with a darker green to build the base. There we go. A little bit of titanium white still. And we'll use the dark under portion of the tree as the initial layer of moss. And then here we're building slight highlights on top of it. Not big ones. But that means leaving portions of the edges of these applications, that almost black pigment that we've already instilled on the canvas. And right now it's void of texture, it's void of real depth. That's okay, we'll work that on soon. We can even tap this to a point over the blue that we applied. I know that right now it looks almost like a black. It's pretty dark, but we'll interject a little bit of that titanium white. And I think for this application I'm actually going to switch on over to the smaller flat-headed brush. Make sure that's a little bit damp. Head into the side. And we're slowly going to build up these values to be brighter and brighter. They're never going to be akin to that of the blues that we've introduced, but they will be brighter than that which they currently are. And these brighter greens are going to exist predominantly on the left and the right hand side of our tree, because that's where the light's wrapping around, where the very back of it is going to remain a bit darker. Just do some taps up into the blue, taps down into the blue, taps over the blue. Lots of layering. Trying to keep my hand out of the way. Trying to keep that back of the tree a bit darker. Trying to make not singular elongated strokes, but myriad of taps and drags. And you can see how we're building that up. Now here you can see from a bit of a side view, that way there are less reflections. We'll also double down on our green, still using Mars Black. Just like so. We'll use a hint of our Ultramarine blue, that way it's a bit of a cooler green. And now the sun is really coming out. So I might have to adjust that on the camera. Look in the viewfinder in just a second. And that is a very bright looking painting. So we'll just make a little adjustment like that. I think that looks pretty good. Go back to some of our greens. Build those up along the sides here. Lots of little markings, no big ones. I think I could even go to a bit of a more saturated green. And now we're losing the sun behind a cloud. So we'll see in just a second how this all looks in the viewfinder. It's also one of those things where you can close all of the windows in your space and then use artificial lights. Oh yeah, that's pretty dark. But I don't mind going back and forth. I'm going to go for a darker green. Re-interject that into some of the moss to the central right hand side. Keep it heavily textured. Just build up. Now, let's do some actual texture. Mars Black. A little bit of our green, a little bit of our blue. We're looking for a mixture of both the green and the blue. Pretty even. We'll spread it wide on our palette. We'll switch over to the dry fan brush. We'll pick up this pigment on both sides. We'll tap on a lot of darker texture into the greens, but we can also do it into the blues. This is going to build a lot of depth later on, once we add our highlights. We have a vast amount of these tiny markings in the foreground, in the grasses, foliage. So it only makes sense that the bark also has an equal amount of detail. And a lot of the actual application styles for these varied subjects are quite similar. There we go. Let me brighten that. Might be able to see it a little bit better. It's difficult to tell because I'm just looking into a little LCD screen, but you're going to be looking at a bigger monitor, right? Might even take this time to just interject a little bit of this into the distant trees. More of the midground. Immediately I like that better. We didn't add the moss on yet, but that's okay. We can do so with a slightly different layering prioritization. There we go. From here, we'll rework some of those blue highlights. So grabbing more of that ultramarine blue, titanium white, a little bit of our green, a little bit of our Mars black is still in that mix. Because we're mixing it in not a clean area. I actually like that. I think that's better for here. We'll just rebuild some of those larger portions of the surface along the edge of the tree. Just like so. Maybe we can go brighter. And you know what? We can do an additional tapped layer. That's pretty. That's a good color. It's earthy, but it's cool. Grab our fan brush. Apply that predominantly into the highlighted blue portions. And if it looks a little bit too speckled, that's okay. We can go back over this with a flat-headed brush. Connect some of the pieces. But this is really the same technique we used for a lot of the shadows. So in the very least, texturally, it'll be cohesive. And do just a little bit of that on this backing tree, predominantly in the areas where light's going to be connecting to it. A couple applications over here as well. So here we have a nice little side view, and again, these are always great because you get to see what the painting looks like kind of void of those larger reflections. With that, we are going to render a mossy hue, and I was mixing it over here initially next to the blues, though I think I actually want to compare it to the other greens that we have in the painting. I don't want anything quite as bright as what we have. I also don't want it to be too saturated, but I also don't want it to be as dark as it was. So here, in the middle, you can see we're taking off the majority of our Mars black elsewhere. Mix this up. I think that is definitively brighter than that which we've had before. Try that as our moss pigment. We'll go in with our fan brush. And that looks perfect. That's just what we wanted. So we'll do quite a few taps. Initially along the edges, the areas that are closest to the light, because those are the ones that are going to protrude and catch that light. Texturally, this works really well with the blues that we were tapping on, with both the fan brush and the flathead. We can also interject this over here in multiple ways. Have it kind of tie its way back. We can work some onto these other extended branches, and this green's a bit different than the green that we use for the actual foliage, so we don't have to worry about it kind of blending in. This is something that does feel fairly unique to those settings. We can make some areas that are a lot more thick, give them more personality should we want to. And then we can just take the remainder of our pigment, that little bit that we have left on the brush, and we can just interject some extra texture or hue into the backs of our trees, the darker areas that are kind of void of gradient or texture. Now, one more time, I think we'll interject some titanium white, brighten that up. A little bit of sap green, hint of Mars black. Make that nice and thick. We'll grab our fan brush and we'll apply this to the more dense portions of our previously applied moss. So the areas that we really built it up, the areas along the edges that catch highlight. We don't want too much of this because it is brighter. It does start to work into the realm of the highlighted foliage that we have, and therefore we have to be a bit more careful and selective with it. But when we work it specifically into the hearts of our previously applied areas, it can build it, it can add some depth, it can make it more natural, and it can be a great look. And as I have almost no paint left on my brush, I'll do the taps into the darker areas for texture's sake. You can really build it up where there might be light. This is a good fix. There we go. I think the trees now have an almost equal number of taps and speckles, unique intricacies as the grass, and the foliage behind, which is always the goal, making it, again, fit together in a very natural way. Now, should you want to, you don't have to, but we can grab some extra titanium white, work that into the mossy hues with the liner brush, and you can add in very intentional markings to build that moss. I'm only doing this along the areas of the tree that get almost direct sunlight because it is wrapping around right there. We're not going to have much towards the top because there will just be a little bit less moss towards the top of the tree, but also the top of the tree will have more shadows because of the foliage in that area. So we'll just be careful with it. There we go. Nice and clean. Grab a little bit more. Head on over to the other side. Being very particular. And with this, you want to apply as little pressure as possible because when we apply a lot of pressure, our bristles expand, we make much larger markings, and we really don't want to do that right now. We're essentially trying to work within the confines of the applications and the markings that were made by the liner brush, or by the fan brush rather, and they are so small. They're just individual bristles, which we can't actually do with this brush, but we can get close. So that's what we're working on doing. We're making it subtle, we're getting close. Brush has a good amount of water, but not too much, because when it is too much, it can kind of become this larger application again. So it's about finding that middle ground. I'm just speckling on these little bits. Here, when we work inwards a little bit, you can tell it almost gets that same effect as the lighter bits of grass in the darker settings, and I love the pop, but you do have to be careful with it. There we go. Almost there. Alright, so taking a step back, I think it's looking pretty good, though it's finally time to interject the sunlight right up here that'll be beaming through the trees, and I think it'll look pretty beautiful. So we'll start with our titanium white, a little bit of our Naples yellow, hint of our burnt sienna. We're essentially recreating the pigments that we used for the sky, though we might make it just a little bit warmer with the Naples yellow. We still want a good amount, we want to keep it fairly thick, and we're going to put this right about here. So with that, we essentially want this flaring effect, where if this is the sun, alright, so we're going to put it right there. We'll switch our brush over to the smaller flat-headed brush, that way we have a bit more control. Grab more of that pigment. We're going to start by making a horizontal line that's going to be biggest where the sun is, and then we'll get smaller with our marking as we work towards the left. You can make it semi-transparent using water and just kind of thin it as it works its way out, or you can return to finger painting, which I always think is fun. But we'll grab a little bit more, and we'll just kind of continue this starry effect from the light source. Initially, a lot of these are going to be quite transparent throughout the entirety of them, with the edges being more so. However, we are going to, over time, go back to the center and build up the opacity there. That way we have this dissipating transition. From where we are. There we go. We can work it over some of the branches. We'll increase its opacity by adding additional titanium white. It's worth noting that if you're working with a very watery mixture, you'll probably want to wait for that first one to dry before you go back in and build up the opacity, because otherwise you might end up just taking paint off the canvas. But I think we're doing okay. We give it some time to dry. I think it'll be enough. And you can see I'm slowly building this, not making anything too dramatic. There we go. It's also worth noting you should probably have pretty clean water and brushes when you go into this, because we are working with such delicate pigments. And transparencies. Going with almost a pure titanium white towards the middle. There we go. Now from here, we get to have some real fun and work on our flowers. So with this, we're going to incorporate a new pigment onto our palette here. This is a brilliant purple. However, you don't need to use it. You could use a cadmium red, mix it with your ultramarine blue, you get a purple. Out of that, interject some titanium white. All of a sudden, it's pretty bright. But with that, we are going to work here into this bottom section, and we're going to do so through movements. And we have a lot of flowers that kind of go through here, and then they wrap around, back like that. And it's kind of this almost snake-like look, but it'll be comprised of a lot of different flowers that are kind of spaced apart. So it won't be obvious, but these are just kind of movements that we want to keep in the back of our head for leading line's sake. So with that, we're going to begin with our larger flathead brush. We'll grab some of our ultramarine blue. First time doing this in a while. We're going to go to a clean area on our palette. This area Doesn't look clean, but everything below it is dry, so it'll work well. We'll grab some titanium white, Mars black. I don't want a highly saturated blue, but I want to make the darkest blue that we'll use for our flowers, and we'll build everything else on top of it. I also want a good amount of it, so as you can see, we're really spreading this pigment. We're making a good showing like that. That's honestly pretty bright. We'll go back to the Mars black, which will darken it. It'll also desaturate it, so then we'll jump over to the ultramarine blue yet again. And we're just working back and forth between these three pigments until we get exactly what we're looking for. And I think that right there is pretty great. So we're going to thin it across our palette. I'm going to put that big brush down. We're going to pick up our fan brush. However, I'm going to wet it. That way we get that forking effect. I want anywhere between 3 and 8 markings through this application. We'll pick that up. And I'm going to start applying these flowers into the shadows because I think this hue will look quite good in there. And then I'll also work it out to the transitionary points that are the outskirts of these shadows. And I'm pressing pretty hard with my brush to get the larger markings that we are. We'll move over here. We know that it's going to move in a bit of an S shape. We're going to press less hard with our brush as we move into this section because we're just going to have smaller looking flowers because of perspective. The flowers are actually the same size, but they're just going to look a little bit smaller. We'll grab more pigment. We know that it's going to work its way back up through here. We can even position the fan brush in such a way that it carries this larger motion and movement. Then I'm going to interject it in the back behind these trees. I'm going to be pretty careful too because we do have fairly refined trees here on the foreground. I don't really want to go over them with the flowers and then have to readjust that, so we'll just be a bit more mindful with our applications. There we go. And then towards the back here we have almost lines of flowers, and it's not that they're growing any differently, it's that perspective is pushing them together visually. So we're just trying to accommodate for that. I'm applying very softly at this point. We are no longer using a lot of pressure, we're using a very small amount of pressure, and we're doing so intentionally because the flowers back here will look a lot more tiny, at least in relation to that which we have elsewhere. We can also use this again in the back here, just build it up a little bit, a lot of lines, kind of this larger moving cluster. But we have openings here, here, an opening here, we have a little bit of an opening here, but we'll do a couple little taps because there will be stray flowers as well. Very good. Very good. I like that. Now, I think, put that brush down for a minute, pick up the larger flathead. We'll interject quite a bit of our brilliant purple into this mix, which is a much brighter pigment. As you can see, it's going to be a darker version of the brilliant purple if you look at them in contrast with each other. And that's good because we need them to be a bit different. This one needs to be brighter because this is going to be the base color for the flowers out here in the sun. It's also worth noting every mark we make right now we are going to cover up with a brighter marking in a new layer. There we go. And we can work these somewhat into the shadows. Again, we have a transitionary area for a reason. It'll show up a lot better in there. Trying to avoid creating lines. So occasionally I'm making these markings with a diagonal application. We're also going to start connecting this area with this area. Now we might even be able to go a little bit darker. And then we'll do quite a bit of this towards the back here. And this is where it transitions from a line. You can use this as a highlight in some of the back. This is where we can transition this from a line into more of that larger sporadic marking. Like so. Again, being careful around my actual trees. There we go. Now here's a bit of an angled shot, just so you can see it without all of the reflections. And at this point, let's build up a much brighter purple. So we're taking a lot of titanium white, we're taking our brilliant purple, mix those next to the previous purple, that way we have it as a good little reference point. And then we can either take the fan brush, or what I'm about to do, which is the liner brush, and we can go in and apply some highlights to the tops of a lot of these darker little flowers. And I'm just applying it to the top because that's where we're going to receive the light. This will be much more noticeable as we work into those transition areas of the shadow and the grass. But in the reference photo, it's much more prominent and bold. I'm going for something that's more on the subtle side, and intentionally so. I really like the warmer hues that we interjected into our painting, and I want those to really persist as we come to the end of this. So I'm not going to overdo our flowers, at least not in the initial applications and layers. I think that's something that we have the opportunity to build up over time, but going into it, I'm just going to be a little careful. I'm not going to overcommit. There we go. I think the more you do, the more it starts to make sense. And we can also build it up from here even. That said, towards the end of each of these lessons, I like to give a little keyword, something you can use in the comment section to either note that you're someone who sticks around and really works hard, that you're a real part of the community. It's always fun to see who can kind of repeatedly get the keyword and interject that into a sentence. And we do still have some painting to do, but I think it's a good time for that. And I think today's word, or rather phrase, sometimes you do a phrase, sometimes you do a sentence, sometimes you do a word. This time I kind of want to just know what your favorite flower to paint is. Big or small? Is it classic, like roses, or maybe you have something like peonies, or maybe you're a tulips fan? This is also just good for me to know for future painting lessons, right? So in the comments, just let me know what your favorite flower to paint is. Maybe you include why. Don't have to. But it'll be fun to see. And again, everybody else who gets this far will also know that you are one of the dedicated few. On average, only 13% of people make it to the very end of these videos. And that makes sense. These are very long videos. But it's always fun to see again who routinely gets here. Also, I want to say a big thank you to everybody up over on Patreon for supporting the channel, making lessons like this happen. These lessons could not and would not exist if it was not for you and your support. So thank you directly. It is an honor and a pleasure to make these lessons for a living, and I really appreciate you providing me the opportunity to spend these days painting and making art and planning lessons and doing all these different creative things that I think we all love. So it's because of you, and I thank you, and I'm going to continue to try to make the best lessons I possibly can. I think every year they get a little bit better. We always aim for that progress, and if you've been following along for a number of years, you know, we started with the 10-minute painting lessons, and then we did lessons that were just under an hour, and then they were a bit longer, and other quite a bit longer, but I think they do just get better and better. If you want something quick and easy, we do have the older ones on the channel, but again, I really appreciate you being here and making these with me. Also, you know, speaking of Patreon, if you're new here, up there you can get ad-free access to all of the new lessons posted as of, I believe, February of this year. So you don't have to sit through those. Additionally, you can get the traceables to help you with the drawing process, so you don't have to worry about perspective, getting all of the line work and all of that correct. If you are a big fan of painting but you're not a big fan of drawing, it kind of just makes life easy. Additionally, up there you can get my ebooks, which includes Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials, everything you need to know about acrylic painting before you jump into your first acrylic painting. There are ebooks full of additional traceables. You can get access to our exclusive Facebook group where everybody shares their renditions of these pieces. It's a very supportive, positive community. It's pretty fun to see different versions of these, and I know I myself get pretty inspired. To everybody up there who's listening right now, big thank you to you for posting that which you do and keeping that such a lovely space. Also, very soon I'm adding a tier where you can submit images to be painted. So there's a bunch of stuff up there. If you want ad-free access, traceables, reference photos, pictures of materials, occasionally polls, all of that good stuff, check it out. We also do big 24 by 36 inch canvases sometimes, break them down into 6 or 7 lessons, but it's a big one, and those are always pretty rewarding. Don't want to do any of these in the heart of the shadows, just because we won't really receive the light there. We want a different highlight hue for that section. Let's take a step back. Okay, so it is looking good. We're going to add a lot of purple onto almost the horizon here. We're just going to do some lines of flowers in the purple we currently have. We can have them combine. Occasionally they have openings, and occasionally there are randomized ones, but because they're so far away, they do visually amalgamate into horizontal applications. And then as you get closer to us, they can kind of space apart a little bit. You can build these up through here. Oh, I really like this. I think it added a lot. Admittedly, I was a little hesitant because it was a big step. We're covering up a lot of painting that we worked really hard on, but I think it's important to just have that faith when you're painting. Recognize that if it doesn't work out, that's okay. We can just cover it up, we can go back, we can do it again. And that's what we're doing. Working with confidence. With that, I'm building up an even brighter purple. So additional titanium white, a little bit less of the Mars black in the mix. Switching back to the liner brush. And then we'll add this highlight initially in the background over top of the darker purples we just applied in that horizon-esque area. And this is a good highlight for a highlight, so we can even start moving it down. And this is one of those things where you don't have to incorporate it on every flower, but it can, and it does look good on a lot of them. Also, if your form was a little soft on some of these and you want to further define them, you give them a bit more definition or form. This is pretty beneficial. Very good, very good. Going over a number of areas multiple times to build up the opacity. And then this highlight is going to exist a bit closer here than it will out there, just because of how the light will dissipate as you move farther away from that primary light source. And I'm also attempting to apply this predominantly to the pre-existing highlights. It's not always possible, but that's the general goal. And just let it lessen as we get farther away. Very good. Let's get you a bit closer. Alright, now yet again, we're doubling down on the titanium white in the mix, making this purple even brighter. And it doesn't have to be substantially, but we do just keep moving in that direction, like so. Grab our little liner brush. Grab that new pigment. I'm going to start in the background. Continue to build depth over these lines. Make them a bit more three-dimensional. Make them feel like proper clusters. And you can see, because it's getting so bright, it almost blends in with the yellows of the background and feels quite cohesive like that. I like it. We're also going to start interjecting that on the right hand side in the area that's closest to the sun. And we'll have that progressively stop as we move farther and farther away from the light itself. We don't want it to have a hard stop. We want it to gradually just find an end and naturally kind of dissipate towards those outskirts. Then we find ourselves back in the center, highlighting the most important flowers in the centers on the top, and now we have essentially 3+ layers on a lot of these. And I'm going in with a pretty randomized application, just so that the flowers do feel relatively unique as a whole. Go. Lots of little taps. Alright, so taking that step back, I think it's really filling out nicely, especially through here. I want to go back to the shadows briefly, using the ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of our violet. Of course we need the Mars black because it's a darker value. We need some titanium white so it's not too saturated. And right now I think I want to mix something that's a little bit brighter than that which we used previously. Still working with those same hues. I just want something that pops a little bit more. Then we'll switch over to the fan brush. Make sure it forks by making it damp. We'll go in with some larger taps and textures. same application style as the other flowers. These are the same flowers, they're just in some shadows. So we want them to be larger towards us, we want them to be smaller towards the back. There we go. We need some extra taps back here should we want to, just interject that new hue elsewhere in the painting so that it all comes together, feels cohesive in a good way. We'll switch on over back to the larger flat-headed brush. We'll make it even brighter. When we do that, we'll desaturate it, so we'll re-interject our saturation with more of our ultramarine blue. And that's a beautiful color. This one is quite bright, so we're going to be careful. We're going to switch over to our liner. I'm going to tap in not highlighted flowers, but ones that, again, have some depth. We're applying this over the previously applied larger blue flowers. And it's also worth noting, these aren't actually blue flowers. They just look blue in the shade, in the same way that the bark in the back of the tree looks a little bit blue because of the color of the shade. So we have that nice tapped on texture right there. We'll continue tapping it on through here. I think that looks like it follows through quite nicely. I think we could even go brighter if we wanted to, but at this point I'm pretty happy. It's up to you. You can take artistic liberties. You can add in different colors of flowers if you want to. It's up to your vision of the piece. Yeah, I like that. And now I think we'll do something fun and head back to the top briefly. I'm going to grab the smaller flat-headed brush because the larger one has different hues on it that I don't really want to work with. I don't want the blues and the purples on my brush. I don't want to dilute what I'm currently making. So with this, it's a lot of titanium white, a little bit of Naples yellow, some of that green gold, and this is a very bright green, which I'm going to use to further interject leaves onto our tree. And a lot of these are probably best applied from a distance, holding the brush like this, that way we get that wider view. We do need some in front of these branches, because branches will also move forward towards us, right? And in the process of applying all of that bark and moss, building it up, we essentially lost a lot of those little pieces of foliage that found their way in front of the tree. I want to be fairly intentional with this, but because of the moss, it'll all typically feel pretty good in this setting. We can apply some over here. We can also switch on over back to this brush yet again. And you know what? I'm going to make the camera a little bit brighter for you. There we go. Go back to the Mars black. A little bit of the sap green, titanium white. We're remaking the color for our bark in an abundance. Back to the liner brush. Now, if we want, we can cover up some of those newly applied pieces of foliage if we feel like we overdid it. We don't like the positioning, the clusters of some, but we can also just continue to build out beautiful little branches. And at this point in the painting, we are making micro adjustments. We're just trying to make it unique in the way that we want it to look. So feel free to have fun, extend things, make bold decisions, make subtle decisions, little ones that amalgamate to big impacts. All of our pieces are going to look a little bit different, that's okay, even if you're using the traceable. You know, it's better than okay. It's pretty wonderful that we all render something that's ours and unique, despite the fact that we're kind of working with the same reference photo and idea. But I hope you're having a great time. I hope you feel like you're learning. I hope you feel excited, ready to go paint. And, you know, actually, I know not everybody who watches these paints. I know some of you just watch these to relax. And if you're doing that, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you feel like there's some weight off your shoulders. And you're able to close your eyes and just kind of enjoy life a little bit, you know? Whatever the case may be, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you're happy. You're doing well. Friendly reminder that throughout the painting process, you should get some water, you should get some food. Stay healthy. Stay mindful of it. It's easy to get lost in the creative process. I know I do. But I want you doing well. So with that, we're just going to essentially bring this guy to fruition. Again, if you'd like the same brushes I'm working with, you can find them in the video description. If you'd like the ad-free, early access, traceables, ebooks, all that, you can find that up on Patreon, again linked in the description. And I will see you soon with a brand new painting lesson. So thank you for being here, and above all, as always, stay creative.